De Bruyne at left wing, a right back as a 10, and Kovacic doing his best Rodri Fernandinho impression. Pep has already decided to innovate and evolve Manchester City. We are only 1 week into the new Premier League season. But how did City set up against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge? How did they get the win? How did they manipulate Chelsea's out of possession shape in particular? What are the weaknesses of what Pep is doing at City? What are the main strengths? We're also going to be viewing this game through the lens of what Doku did well and did not do well, because there's been a lot of debate and discussion and discourse around Jeremy Doku's performance. Let's start, shall we, with the lineups, or what I thought the lineups were going to be anyway. So on the left, we've got how Chelsea set up without the ball. On the right, we've got what I thought City were going to do with the ball. We can see, however, from the passing network, for example, that's not the case. Whilst I thought there was going to be a double pivot situation with Lewis going from right back into midfield, what actually happened was Kovacic was the central hub. Kovacic was the pivot. De Bruyne's positioning also really interesting, slightly technically to the left of Jeremy Doku. So why were City doing this? What was the rationale behind that? So if we just go to the tactical board for a moment, we can see what actually was happening. It was almost like a staggered pivot, if you will, with Bernardo ahead of Kovacic. De Bruyne actually more so to the left. Lewis starting from right back, pushing all the way up here. De Bruyne and Doku sometimes interchanging, often De Bruyne holding the width out on that left-hand side. So why were City doing this, first of all, and then we'll assess the weaknesses and strengths of the system and view it through the lens of Jeremy Doku. There is no central passing option for Kovacic here, essentially. He can't really find it to De Bruyne, Palmer's picking him up, he can't find it to Bernardo, Lewis, etc. There's no central progression on offer here because Chelsea have really compacted the centre of the pitch. They've got their double pivot of Caicedo and Lavia, and then their forward four are all pressing as a unit. It's not quite a 4-4-2 press, it's more of a 4-2-4 press. So how did Pep decide to get out of this issue? Because this is a big problem for City. Stopping City's central progression has been a big issue across Pep's entire City career. So how has Pep decided to solve this problem? Well, obviously, by making it so that Kevin De Bruyne plays out at left wing. Because why wouldn't that be the solution? Really interesting. So what was happening was that De Bruyne was picking up these areas of the pitch in and around here, and that caused a massive problem for Chelsea's midfield pair because Caicedo was obviously concerned about the presence of De Bruyne. Therefore, he would be dragged over here. He'd felt the need to come and pick up De Bruyne. So what that was doing was taking Chelsea's midfielders out of the midfield, more into the wide areas, vacating the central space. And guess what? If you vacate central space against City, that means someone's probably going to exploit it. Before Doku and Savio switched sides, it was Savio exploiting that central space, and then it was Doku exploiting that same space. Here's the first example I could find of City doing that successfully. De Bruyne's starting position, as I say, is at left wing. Savio opts to drop in centrally. Guardiola finds him. Caicedo is all the way over here now. And all of a sudden, despite De Bruyne not even touching the ball, his presence alone has created a situation where now Guardiola can play it centrally into Savio, and Savio drives centrally, and it leads to a decent opportunity for Manchester City. And ultimately, after Savio and Doku swapped sides after around 10-15 minutes, it was Doku who ultimately scored a goal by virtue of this system. Doku had a very frustrating game. Here, for example, he really should be finding Haaland there rather than the back heel of Colwill. He should be putting in a better ball here. He shouldn't be playing this incredibly risky pass when in the 70th minute when you're only 1-0 up in your own defensive third. There's been a lot of negative talk about Doku's performance, and it was very frustrating, as I say, but this is a player who City fans must not lose faith in because he is a wonderful, wonderful footballer, and the goal is not scored without him, and let's assess that now, shall we? So, it's the same situation as we explored earlier. De Bruyne technically not starting at left wing here, but he's still on that left-hand side. He's still asking that question of the Chelsea players. Caicedo is concerned. Caicedo feels the need to go over there and try to stop this attack at source. Caicedo up against Doku. Lavia appreciates that Doku is an incredible 1v1 threat. He goes over to him. And now, that is Chelsea's double pivot. Out on City's left-hand side. There is now central space for City to exploit. It is very, very clever work by Doku, and again, a lot of it stems from Pep's system in the game, taking De Bruyne over to the left, creating that overload on the left, making it so that City have options centrally. Doku, intelligent ball into Bernardo. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that Bernardo's touch here was intentional and it leads to this situation where Haaland finishes wonderfully. The finish is great. Touch by Bernardo is great if intentional, but this goal is scored because of Pep's system and because of the understanding and positioning of both De Bruyne and Doku. The other good thing about the system, which Pep also used in the Community Shield against Manchester United, is that it gets even more out of Kevin De Bruyne as he's getting older, as he's getting less dynamic, maybe less influential in the smaller spaces. It allows De Bruyne to operate outside of a block. Now, what I mean by that, if we can picture, for example, Chelsea's block, their out of possession structure here, we can visualise that box as the block, if you will. It's in City's best interests to get Kevin De Bruyne into situations outside of the block where he is facing play rather than operating within it. The benefit of this is that it takes less strain on De Bruyne. It makes it a lot easier for him and for his passing game in particular. This is one of those moments. This doesn't lead to anything, but again, De Bruyne's positioning is out on that left with Doku more central. Once again, the pass doesn't come to anything here as De Bruyne overhits it, unlike him. This is a really promising sign in terms of how City can get the most out of De Bruyne as he is aging. This now gives him more space and time to operate in facing the play, something which is really in his interest and can maybe get the most out of his brilliant long-distance passing. The relationship between Doku and De Bruyne, again, is ultimately why City were able to win this game. Doku is fantastic here. He struggled against Cucurella out on the right, but he had his way with gusto over and over and over again. De Bruyne, so intelligent here. He goes out to the left. This drags Lavia out. This gives Doku so much space to attack here all of a sudden, just by virtue of De Bruyne moving out to the left. It now means that Doku knows, now I know De Bruyne's left, I can go more central. A few seconds later, it's the opposite. Doku goes out wide. De Bruyne comes more centrally. This leads to a situation where all of a sudden, City have a really good chance to score. Haaland should do better with the opportunity. But again, that is a symptom of the system and a positive of the system which has created that and the relationship between Doku and De Bruyne, most importantly of all. Jeremy Doku had a very difficult game on that right side. On the left, he sometimes struggled, but overall, he was very good. And yes, he was frustrating. Of course he was. But some people have gone a little bit too far the other way. We do need to remember what is it that Doku offers and provides to the City side. Of course, some of the end product does need to improve. Of course it does. But Doku gets City up the pitch and he gets City into really dangerous areas, as exemplified by this wonderful graph by Mark Stats. He is on his own in terms of carrying work and progressive carries. It's not even close. This is a player who within 3 seconds can go from a position like this, where he's surrounded by 3 Chelsea players, to this. So that's how City attacked, but how does City defend? Because, again, Pep changed how City play. Normally, City defend in a 4-4-2. But against Chelsea, that wasn't the case. Instead, City pressed out in a 4-1-4-1, which was really interesting. I'm not 100% sure as to why this was the case. I'm going to propose a theory. Last season, Chelsea had their way in terms of our midfield. City in that game were incredibly press intensive. They went incredibly aggressive and incredibly high in terms of their press at Stamford Bridge. That caused issues for City. Chelsea were able to play out of City's press. Rodri was left on an island all on his own. Now, you would think that Kovacic would be left on an island when out of possession here, but actually, that wasn't the case. So maybe the thinking was drop De Bruyne slightly deeper, make City a bit more compact in the centre, don't commit as many bodies to the forward press, and just allow Chelsea to pass around the back and see if they can actually break through your more compact centre. Maybe that was the idea of, as I say, switching from a 4-4-2 to a 4-1-4-1. Haven't quite figured out why they did that, but maybe that is a theory. You can see that here. For example, there is the back four. Again, Kovacic, all on his Todd, and then the midfield four, and then again Haaland there. Not a very intense press from Manchester City, and again, that is probably by design, maybe with the fear of what happened last season in terms of Chelsea's counter-attacking threat, for example. Don't want to commit as many bodies to a forward press. But this system from City does have its weaknesses. The emphasis is the 3-1-6. Kovacic is all on his own. So he's got a lot of defensive work to do. Now, thankfully, Kovacic put in a man-of-the-match performance. Even without the goal, he was wonderful in the game. He was brilliant defensively, going forwards, calmness on the ball, getting City out of danger, carrying the ball. He was wonderful. But naturally, this system is quite frail, as I say, from a rest defence perspective, when you've only got one in the midfield, and it's not even a player who is typically associated with covering distance in transition quickly, or particularly well. I'm not saying he's bad at it, but this is not Fernandinho we're talking about. It's Kovacic. So this leads to situations where Chelsea, throughout the game, had decent opportunities. City are caught out here slightly. Kovacic isn't actually in the centre of the pitch. Akanji pushes up to Enzo, and then one ball. And if Palmer's positioning is a little bit better rather than just being stood offside, Chelsea might have a really good opportunity to score there. That was Akanji pushing up then. Now it's Ruben Diaz here. Again, Kovacic is left isolated, and there is always the opportunity for Chelsea to try to exploit that and counterattack. Now, again, thankfully, from a City perspective, it doesn't lead to anything. Ruben Diaz does really well to intercept it. I have my long-term concerns about the midfield solidity of this system. Maybe it was just for a very specific use case. It was used against United and Chelsea because how they set up off the ball, it is beneficial to do this. Whether that will be City's long-term formation throughout the course of the season, that remains to be seen. I could have spent so much time in this video about the brilliant performances of Savio in that first half. Rico Lewis was fantastic. Doku, we've discussed. Kovacic was the man of the match. And even from a Chelsea perspective, I thought Lavia was wonderful. Could have maybe spent a bit more time on him. I thought the main thrust of this video should have been that 3-1-6 and the 4-1-4-1, the positives and negatives, and whether we'll see it throughout the season, how it gets the most out of some of City's players. That's the video. Really hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you always stay updated for whenever I upload a YouTube video or a live stream. Shout out to all my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube. Shout out in particular to Tony, my biggest supporter. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time.